my favorite topic and my least favorite topic, report cards. We are talking now about the report card. The report card. And Jesus gave us that report card. And we're going to be graded based on this particular report card. He gave us this report card at the greatest speech ever given by man. And it wasn't in front of a classroom or wasn't some big corporate America talk. It was the Sermon on the Mount. And in particular, there's so many great things there, but today we're going to talk about the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes. Those are the subjects that each of you and your students will be graded upon at your final judgment. Beatitudes is a word that can be translated a number of different ways. Beatus in Latin can be beatitude, as we say it. It can be, and you've heard, it can be blessed. You've heard the translation of blessed are they who. You've heard the translation of happy. It is who. So beatus can be happy. Beatus can also mean rich. It's interesting, rich. So some translations say rich is he who. So different ways to translate this word, all having a certain sense of the same meaning. And I would be willing to wager that if none of you were paid anymore, all the paychecks dried up, sorry, none of you are being paid, that quite a few of you wouldn't come back. It's not wrong to seek riches. Now, our gospel today talked about it's harder for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. But we have to have sustenance. We have to go out and make money. I have to make money. I have to make money. I don't think anybody in here has taken a vow of poverty. So seeking riches is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a matter of how much you are attached to that. How hard do you drive towards that? So we're going to talk about riches throughout this. The fact that you are right now at your place of work, like you're here and it's work, it's a job, and you get paid for it. You get paid for it. And that's a good thing. I hope you raise the kids here to know that charity doesn't happen without profit. So nonprofits, unless some man or woman at their private place of business, unless they make a profit and have a surplus, then your nonprofit doesn't get donations. It only comes after there is profit. So it's a good thing. It's just a matter of how attached we are and how much we pursue them. So Christ, when he talks about the Beatitudes, he's talking about us obtaining riches. Now it goes far beyond material riches, of course. So we're going to talk about that. But when I talk about the Beatitudes of business, I'm talking about something a lot more than just the dollar. Dollar's not a bad thing, but we're talking about how to be truly blessed in our day-to-day working life, business, organization, institution, school, parish, your place of work. So when you see business, relate it to your place of work. Now, the very first Beatitude is special, and I'm going to talk the most about this one and then kind of fly through the rest. But this goes right to what we were talking about, or Father was talking about in his homily on the gospel, about how the rich man, how hard it is for him to enter the kingdom of heaven. So we should be very glad this says, blessed are the poor in spirit. And that's kind of our get out of jail free card, right? I mean, it doesn't say blessed are the poor, because again, you're not called to be poor. You're called to make money and provide. So you're not called to be poor. but you absolutely are called to be poor in spirit. And that's when the gospel talks about it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's not necessarily talking about the guy who has a big paycheck. He's talking about the one who is spiritually rich in the sense of attached to riches. So what does poverty of spirit mean? So when you think of a poor guy on the street begging for money, you drive by him, he's standing right there at the intersection with a sign or whatever. Poverty usually means that you're empty. Bank account's empty, your pockets are empty, your wallet's empty, your stomach is empty, and you are relying on other people for sustenance. So you have to beg for money. You have to beg for food, beg for clothes, whatever it is, you're begging. What Christ is calling us to do in the Beatitudes and to be poor in spirit, is to beg of him, beg for him to give us the spiritual riches that we need to be holy. So we have to ask for his grace. We have to ask for his life. We have to ask for his sacramental grace. We have to ask for all the things that he can give us. We have to beg him for that as much as a beggar begs for food, beggar begs for money. Because the rich man of the Gospels, who's mentioned a couple of different times, the young rich man who goes away sad, the rich man who can't get into heaven because he's too filled with himself, he has his self filled with his own attachments, his own self-reliance, his own pride, his ego, whatever it may be, and he has not emptied himself, made himself poor and vulnerable in spirit, knowing that he has to rely only on God. I mean, the pictures around this church, all those pictures of Jesus on the cross, that's a poor man. He has emptied himself completely. He has no self-reliance left. It's gone. And he's empty and barren and broken. So spiritually, we are called to do that so that we can get the kingdom of heaven, so that the kingdom of God will be ours. So why do I talk about this in regards to business? This, and again, a school or parish I'm treating like a business. Why? Not only are we spiritually called to exercise these Beatitudes, but more particular to what we do day in and day out in the work world, the single biggest problem I have found in business organizations is that the leaders, and here we can relate that to a teacher of a classroom or administration or the CEO of some big company or whoever it may be, leaders lack poverty of spirit. Now, how am I relating this stuff? Well, usually the more you advance in a career, the more filled with ego and pride you get. Often the more experience you have in life, you end up saying, I don't need advice from that person. I don't need help from that person. I'm very self-reliant. And so their own spiritual bank account becomes very, very filled with self-worth and self-reliance. I can tell you how many executives in the corporate world just don't listen. And that's the biggest problem in corporate America, is that leaders don't listen. They become myopic. They become so self-righteous that they think they don't have anything to learn, especially from their employees. That's the biggest problem, and it's a spiritual problem. So it's a corporate problem, but it's a spiritual problem. Next slide. So there's different levels of leadership. And there's a great book called Good to Great, where a guy named Jim Collins talks about 5 levels of leadership. And I'm not going to go through all of those. But whether you're leading a kindergarten class or you're leading Bank of America, leadership is core to what you do. Every person in here is a leader in some capacity, especially when you have the little vulnerable souls all over the place. So how does a leader exercise this first beatitude? How are you as a leader in your classroom or your administration supposed to live the beatitude of being poor in spirit? The level 5 of all these different leaderships, you have supervision or management and other kinds of stages of leadership. But the selfless leader is the one who blames the problems on themselves and gives credit to those that he or she is leading. So think of a great coach who says, when the team wins, it's because of the players. When the team loses, it's because of me, the coach. When your students are struggling or failing, or there's chaos in the class, or something's just not right, how quick are you to point the problems at the parents, at the students, at the administration, at COVID, whatever it is, versus how much are you self-reflecting, being poor in spirit, and saying, I'm a big part of this problem. How can I improve this situation? This is humility at work. Double meaning there. Literally at your work. So being a great leader requires one to be truly poor in spirit. And I encourage you, even with these little people, thinking about that. The attitude that middle schools, eighth graders can have, I'm an expert in this. I got lots of those. It's so easy for me to point the finger and say, nasty attitude, shame on him, and just point the finger. But if I'm going to be a good leader, I have to turn the finger back at me and say, you know what? Maybe I'm not as rich in spirit as I think I am. I need to be poor in spirit and say, you know what? Maybe I'm not as wealthy of wisdom and wealth and virtue and wealth and power as I thought I am. And I have to be humble and poor in spirit and point the finger at myself. So no matter what age level, no matter what your area, this first beatitude, I think, is critical. Let's go to the next slide. Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be shown comfort. This is a glorious beatitude. Perfect for a school. Perfect for a school. Why? Because you know when something's wrong with the kids. Whether they physically don't feel good, or there's a problem at home, or there's a drama going on between the students, you know when there's something wrong. And sometimes being that great leader or a person of the Beatitudes, here you are being called to just be a Christian when you're teaching these kids, mourning with them, empathetic, feeling with them. That doesn't mean excusing bad behavior or anything like that, which we'll get to. But being truly empathetic. When they're sad, you're sad. When they're happy, you're happy. So I'm expounding this a little bit to beyond the mourning, but to be empathetic in all areas. Great leaders do that. Great teachers do that. Great teachers suffer with their students. Now, in the corporate world, and I bet you my bottom dollar that the same thing's true in the academic world, only 12% of employees quit because of money. That's staggering. Now, I think most of them say it's for the money. These surveys show it's not the case. Why? Next slide. 92% of employees are more likely to stay with the job if shown more empathy. If shown more empathy. That's a staggering reality. So I tell when I'm talking to groups of presidents and CEOs, I'll say, which one costs you more, turnover or just empathizing with your employees a little bit more? And it's amazing, but this is true. This is true statistics. It's got to be the same way in an academic setting. It's got to be the same way with students. I bet you anything when students have a serious are disgruntled with their teachers. I mean, kids are kids, but is there more empathy that teacher can show with that kid and help turn the corner? I mean, I remember being a young elementary student, and the teachers that I didn't connect with, bond with, it's because I felt like they were just grading. There wasn't any love there. And then for being a very aggressive little wannabe man, whether it was a male or female teacher, if I felt like they actually cared about me, I would walk over burning coals for that teacher. And if I felt like they didn't care about me, I was their worst nightmare in class. I'm not excusing myself, but I think we want empathy. Those little kids, they want empathy so bad, and the Beatitudes are staring us in the face, telling us to do that. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the land. Meek, the meek. Now, there's only one place in all of Scripture where Jesus says, learn of me. Only one place. He says, learn of me, for I am meek and humble of heart. So meekness is not exactly the same thing as humility. Jesus isn't redundant. He didn't say humble and humble. He said meek and humble. So what's the difference? Well, humility is knowing your place in relation to God and in relation to your fellow man and recognizing your lowliness there. Meekness is a little different. Meekness has a little bit more of a physical component to it. How do you carry yourself? How do you express yourself? How do you express that humility physically? And as a CEO, I have to ask myself regularly, how am I carrying myself? So if I'm walking through the office and I'm a man on a mission, and I'm going to, the boardroom, or I'm upset about something, do I just walk by employees almost in an intimidating way? I can do that because I can get in my zone, right? In my zone, and I'm just not thinking about these people. And that's horrible. CEOs do this all the time. And so we get to where we're transacting business and we violate the virtue of meekness. Meekness is walking gently and humbly, softly. Gentleman. And especially with females, with a tenderness that only a woman can give, a gentleness that only a man can give. There's differences there. And meekness is where you are very intentional about communicating that physically with somebody, especially the troublemakers. Now, I'm not letting troublemakers off. We're going to get to that. But meekness is a very important virtue in this regard. Next slide. So in the corporate world, now that we've talked about what is meekness compared to humility, and if you have the picture in your head of that, hard driving executive, pounding his way through the hall, you have the opposite of meekness. I've heard so many times somebody say, oh yeah, he's the boss, and when he walks in the room, everyone knows it. And they say that because they think it's impressive. And I'm at the point where I think that's unimpressive. That's a violation of meekness. That's a violation of meekness. So there is a corporate hubris that infects especially successful people. 75% of employees report that the boss is the worst and most stressful part of the job. So as a boss, that worries me. I mean, I'm supposed to be not their buddy, not their friend all the time, but I'm not supposed to be the cause of their stress. I'm not supposed to be that. 65% of people would prefer a new boss over a pay raise. These are staggering numbers. So, only you as professional teachers and administrators, I ask you to take this idea and relate it to students. They're not employees, but there's a similarity there. There's a hierarchy. There's a leadership and a subordinate. How does that relate? You know, what would those students do to get out of your classroom? You know, I know a lot, I'm sure, in some cases. But it's something to consider. And I think usually it's not often the words that you say or don't say, it's that meekness and empathy that we're able to show. And just to loop you back to the beginning, the report card, your report card that you're going to have standing before your judge are these 8 Beatitudes. And you're going to get A's, B's, C's, D's, or F's in poverty of spirit, mourning, and meekness. You can't get around that report card. You just can't. Even COVID will not get you around that report card. Next. So the next Beatitude is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. So, for what do you hunger and thirst? We're getting a powerful rainstorm here, so hopefully that tornado doesn't come through. But for what do you hunger and thirst? Is it power? Is it money? Is it reputation? What are those things that are driving you in your career and your personal life? The Beatitudes make us ask that. So this is fascinating. And I'll mention this because I don't think anybody really goes into teaching for the sake of making a fortune. Could be wrong, but I think that's the case. So I think this is good to hear this. But the Copenhagen Business School did an extensive survey, and they were trying to find out, do people, when they asked themselves, do I have enough money to buy what I want? And they were asking that question, and they actually realized that's the wrong question. That's not the question that people ask themselves. Deep down, that's not what people ask. Do I have enough money to buy what I want? People ask themselves, do I have as much as those people I'm comparing myself with? That's what people ask themselves. Do I have enough money to get what the Joneses have? That's the question they ask themselves. And the next amazing thing is when they started asking people how much money is enough money, no matter what income bracket they were in, whether they made $35,000 a year, $350,000 a year, or $3.5 million a year, all income brackets said 2 to 3 times as much as they make would be the perfect amount of money for them. That shows that this is all about relativity. This is all about keeping up with the Joneses. Jeff Bezos doesn't have enough money for some reason. He just doesn't. And if he has to get to outer space faster than Elon Musk, I mean, there's always a comparison, right? Who has the best rocket, you know? That's just the comparison. So, again, you folks didn't go into work to make a fortune, and that's wonderful. But just keep in mind, whatever financial struggles you have as teachers, I promise you, I say definitively, authoritatively, with absolute certainty, if you made a whole lot more money, you'd still have the same problems. I mean, the things you're buying might be different, but psychologically, emotionally, the strain and the desire for money would probably be the same. And if it wouldn't be, then you're happy either way. You're happy either way. So that's just something interesting. Those are hard data points to keep in mind. And I think that's beautiful. I mean, if we realize then it's not so much how much we make, it's are we content with what we have? And that's incredible. So when you're hungering and thirsting for righteousness versus, you know, another car, another house, another vacation, whatever, happiness really begins to come in. Then you are truly rich because you're not wanting anything else. You know, so that's a beautiful thing, I think, for teachers to remember and anybody to remember. Next slide. Oh, this just reminds me of St. Augustine's famous quote, "My heart is restless until it rests in you alone." So again, what are you craving? What is it in life that you're really wanting? Peace, tranquility, ease, retirement? And what is it that you're really seeking? But your report card at your particular judgment is going to be on, are you craving righteousness? Are you wanting justice in the world? Wanting good to happening? Are you craving righteousness? I've only been like really, really, really hungry and really thirsty one time in my life. And it was extremely uncomfortable. It was a dehydration. It was miserable. And I was craving water. I'm supposed to crave the Lord that much. So there's a little story, another Desert Father story. I love Desert Father stories. We got one this morning, remember? So there's an old Desert Father and a young Desert Father. And the young Desert Father goes to the old Desert Father and says, can you tell me, what does holiness feel like? I don't know if I'm holy. Like, what's it feel like? And the old Desert Father takes the young man out to a stream and says, kneel down in the water. So he obeys, kneels down. And the old guy takes the young guy's head and slams it under the water and holds him there until he's out of breath. He pulls him up. As soon as he catches his breath, he does it again and again and again until the guy is just toast. And he drags him to the shore and very lovingly holds him and kind of brings him back to his senses, lets him catch his breath. And when he can breathe, the young man says, what are you doing? Why'd you do that to me? And he said, when you crave the Lord as much as you just craved oxygen, you'll know what holiness feels like. That's craving. And that's what the Lord is telling us to do. You will be judged on that. That's on your report card. Next. So blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville, Ohio, a small Catholic school, great Catholic school. And there was this famous priest there. His name was Father Michael Scanlon. And Father Michael Scanlon, he did, while I was there, he said, okay, for 40 days, I'm going to do a one-sentence homily every day for 40 days at Mass. And it drove up attendance because it was quick and dirty. Well, this particular day I went, the gospel reading was on the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. I'd heard it 1,000 times like you've heard it. And then his homily, he stands up. Everyone sits down after the gospel. He's standing there when we're waiting for the one-sentence homily. And we don't even get a sentence. We only get 2 words. And it was great silence. And then he said, as we. And he sits down. As we. Now, so it leaves us sitting, what? As what? As what? What? There's whispers. And then he just sits there forever, making us contemplate this. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Oh, man, wait a minute. I'm not sure. It kind of ruined the Our Father for me. I'm not sure I really want to say that. What Jesus taught us to say is, Father, forgive us in the same way and to the same extent that we forgive others. Whoops. So Conor better become a whole lot more merciful if I want mercy shown to me. So blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown mercy. He's put that right there in the Our Father. We said it today at Mass. You probably say it, if not every day, multiple times a week. And I hope I just ruined it for you for the rest of your life. Because when I pray it now, I say, as we, and I go, oh, man. Oh, man. Really? God, you're supposed to forgive me a whole lot better than I forgive others. You're good at this stuff. I'm not. No, I'm going to be judged on how I forgive others. That's justice. He will show justice to me. His mercy and justice are the same. They're wrapped up in one. So that, it perfected the Our Father for me, and it ruined it at the same time. So I hope that will last with you. And we have to be merciful to the little ones, to our colleagues, to our bosses. I don't know the hierarchy here, but your bosses are human. Forgive them. That doesn't mean forget them. It just means, you don't always have to forget everything bad that happens by the little guys, by your peers, by the big guys. But forgive them. Forgive them. The principal slipped me $20 to say that. I don't know. So the Harvard Business Review had an interesting article called Hire Slow, Fire Fast. And that's something that corporate America talks about. Okay, some people like it, some people hate it. But the point of the article was it's not merciful. So here I am saying forgive, forgive, forgive. However, this is where the going gets tough. Jesus does not expect us to run bloated and inefficient organizations. So while the leadership of this school here is called to be merciful, we're also called to clean house. As a teacher, you're called to be merciful to those students, and you're also called to discipline them. I mean, it goes hand in hand. So it is not compassionate. We're going to relate the school to a business. As a business owner, it is not compassionate for me to keep somebody employed when they're horrible at their job. I am preventing them from finding the right fit for them. Everyone has a right fit. It is not compassionate to the common good for me to force everyone to work with a loser, with somebody who's a bad person, with somebody who can't do the job. That's not compassionate. I'm hurting the entire communal body. So being merciful does not mean being bloated. I mean, I have had to fire people and forgive them in the same day. It's just life. And so you will have to discipline students, get them in trouble, and be merciful at the same time. Now, if I could figure out the way to do that, I could make $1 million because people would love to know that. I don't have that answer, but I do know it has to be done. You have to fire employees, or you have to, kick a kid out of school, or discipline, or suspension, or whatever the stuff is that you have to do, and be merciful at the same time. And it's challenging. It's challenging. But you're called to do that, and you're going to be judged on that. You're going to be judged on that. So there's lots of tools in the corporate world, and I'm sure it applies here, in being merciful, to find out how to help somebody succeed. So there's something called positive psychology. It's a great new movement in the psychological world where they're trying to find out how to help people succeed in life as opposed to just get over a bad experience that happened to them. Okay, my father was abusive. I have to talk about that with the therapist. Correct, got to do that. But that doesn't necessarily help me go forward. I'm just dealing with the past. So positive psychology says, what are your strengths? What are your talents? What are your loves and passions? Psychology is beginning to shift from just analyzing why we feel a certain way to actually guiding us to becoming something better than we are by seeing those innate talents, God-given talents. And when we live those out, we become happier. And the bad stuff becomes less important in our lives. The next very similar thing, maybe you've heard of Strength Finders, but Strength Finder, that's a company, I believe, established by Gallup, the Gallup polls. And they have, tens of millions of people who have participated in surveys, and you find out what your top strengths are. Top strengths. And I did it, it was very revealing. And I said, no wonder I'm bad at this. No wonder I'm good at this. And so I encourage you and the school to invest a little bit of time and money in something like this, whether it's Strength Finder or positive psychology, or there's others. I believe a lot of schools do Myers-Briggs for little kids. You guys remember that? But there's many more options. That's maybe fine. Maybe that's good. But for a young person to be able to say, oh, these are my top 5 strengths, recognizing that they change over time, but there is a certain innate strength that I have, letting young people know that gives them a lot of confidence. That gives them a lot of confidence. And it's merciful to do that so that they can more direct their energy and focus, and they get a much better self-esteem that way. as opposed to just failing in certain things. And if you got kids who are failing in certain things, you got to find ways they succeed. That's merciful. Just like an employee, if they're doing bad at this job, I need to look for a way they can succeed. And I'm not meaning make shortcuts for everybody. I'm not saying that at all. Not everybody has the same strengths. And as a leader of those employees or little kids or big kids, part of being a merciful leader is setting people up for success as opposed to setting them up for failure. And so you have to be very creative in finding out how to do that. It's one of the hardest parts of my job. I get frustrated when an employee stinks at something, and I just want to blame them. But I have to take that finger and kind of turn it around and say, did I set them up for failure? Have I put them in a better seat to where they can be more successful? Or if I start thinking, man, this guy just stinks at everything. He can't do anything right. Then that means I'm not looking hard enough, because there's goodness in there. There's a talent in there. I just haven't found it yet. That doesn't mean I have to keep employing them. I can't employ everybody all the time. But I can't get off the hook by saying this guy just stinks at everything. That's not merciful. It's merciful for me as his leader to find the strengths that he has and see if I can continue to employ that. Next. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. This is probably my favorite one because it talks about actually seeing God. So give me the next bullet point. So this is perfect for a school, right? Because in Matthew's gospel, God says, you must be like these little ones to enter the kingdom of heaven. He said it, not me. What does he mean by that? I got a lot of little ones, so I kind of think, well, there's an innocence. They have no agenda, like when they're little guys and they're talking to you, there's no hidden agenda. And if there is a hidden agenda, it's so obvious. Dad, do you want a remote control car for your birthday? Dad, you want a remote control car. So there's a childlike attribute that's glorious that you guys get to see every single day, especially with the young ones. And I challenge you as teachers and administrators, start looking, okay, what is it that Jesus is saying here? What about these little kids do I have to imitate? What is it? I mean, he's saying that's your ticket to heaven. Why? So, children are simple. Children speak directly. Children come up and they poke me in the stomach and say, Daddy's getting fat. And it doesn't even bother them to say that. That's kind of beautiful. There's an innocence and a directness that little kids are able to have. As we get older, we make things complex. We clutter up our language, clutter up our ideas, clutter up our communication style for all of these different reasons. And we become less childlike. Jesus was very simple, and we are the complicated ones. So I believe that one of the greatest business statements is finding the simplicity on the far side of complexity. What's that mean? So there's simplicity when you first start out at something. And then there's complexity after you're in the weeds. If you keep going, you find simplicity on the far side of complexity. So I think in the business world, if you have an accountant, their first day out of school, and they say something like, cash is king. Well, that's just something you've heard. You don't know what you're talking about. And then ask an accountant who's been doing it for 30 years, and they say the exact same thing, cash is king. They know what they're talking about. So they said the same statement, but they said it on two ends of the spectrum. So in educating children, there is some version here where you can have a complicated lesson plan, you can have a complicated discipline situation, you can have a very complicated, complex way of doing things. But if you keep working hard and keep thinking, and with more and more experience, you've seen the best ones. You've seen the experts, whether they're teachers or administrators or executives or whoever it is. They reach this simplicity. Like they're so good at it, it looks easy. When you see somebody who's so good at something that just looks easy, it's because they've reached the simplicity on the far side of complexity. To me, that's childlike. You've returned. You've gone full circle. You've come back to the simplicity of things. I've often thought, if I could just get to where I can say in truth and charity exactly what I'm thinking, I would say like 1/10 of what I usually say. But truth and charity are really hard. That's a really hard thing. Saints didn't talk a lot. If I was more saintly, this talk would be shorter. You get to where you can be precise and clear and simple and direct, and that's childlike. That's childlike. And that's purity. It's purity of your mind, purity of your speech, purity of your delivery. That's a pure of heart. And we get to see God. That's the second part of this Beatitudes, for they shall see God. It's because there's no complexity in heaven. There's no complexity there. It's all so simple. When we get there, if we get there, we're going to look around and say, man, we sure did complicate that whole life thing. We really complicated it. It was simple. It was simple. And this report card's simple. There's 8 things. It's a simple report card. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. So I say to my kids all the time, they start bickering, they start fighting, and I say, and I think a teacher could use this line too. Hey, can I have a peacemaker? Can I have a peacemaker? Looking for somebody to step in and say, yeah, I'll be a peacemaker. And that means give up your toy or give up this or let them have the last donut or whatever it is that they're about to, pull their swords out over and duel to the death over the last donut hole. I mean, can I have a peacemaker? And I've said it so often that now the kids look at me and say, it's his time to be the peacemaker, You're missing the point, son. So being a peacemaker, that's a very difficult thing. We have a lot of challenges. Can I get the next bullet point? So Peter asked Jesus, he said, Lord, how many times am I supposed to forgive my brother? 7 times? He says, no, 70 times, 7 times, which meant constantly. Now, I actually have a theory on that. I'm not a theologian, I'm not a scripture scholar. But I partly think the reason that he says you have to continually forgive is because if you have to continually forgive, that means you really didn't forgive the first time. Because I think we have to forgive people, not instances. So am I going to forgive my enemy for just the way they are? Or am I forgiving this particular instance? Oh, and then you screwed up again, so I'll forgive you tomorrow, and tomorrow, 70 times 7. No, I think it's more like, have I forgiven this person for being who they are and who they are to me? That might be a one-time deal that covers 1,000 instances. It's just an interesting way to think about it. But it's important to remember that it's not about pacifism. Pacifism is, we will never go to war. We're peacemakers. We make love, not war. It's this whole notion of conflict is bad. We don't ever want conflict. I can't hurt this kid's feelings. That would be terrible. I have to give freedom everywhere, and I have to constantly forgive. No. There is no room in the Holy Catholic Church, in the United States of America, in any business, in this parish, in this school, for pacifism. Because we have to have rules, structure, hierarchy, orders, laws, or we have chaos. Remember, Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, not the free-for-all, not the happy land, not the Woodstock of God. It's the kingdom of God. And that kingdom has rules and responsibilities and regulations. This is not a free-for-all. So when you're running your school, running your class, running your families, yeah, sometimes you have to rule with an iron fist. I am not a pacifist. Boy, my kids can push me, and they want to find out who alpha male is in the house. My 15-year-old boys want to find that. I'll show you. I will show them. I got to do it mercifully. I got to do it like a peacemaker. I have to be charitable, but it's my house, not theirs. And that's a hard balance to strike. So don't ever confuse these Beatitudes, like a peacemaker or mercy, as a pacifist. No, this school will fall apart without strict guidelines, rules, regulations. And if you do not have those and you do not enforce those on a broad scale or on a particular scale with a person, you're doing everybody an injustice. Peace comes through strength. It does. It does at home. It does at work. It does with kids. It does with adults. It does with spouses. You have to have rules. Beauty and truth come from that. What do you call it when a whole bunch of instruments get together and just play their own tunes? It's called a cacophony. What do you call it when they play together? A symphony. That's the difference. This place has to have rules and procedures and regulations. So never confuse these Beatitudes with a free-for-all. There's no room in the Christian life for pacifism. Next. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so the next bullet point, fate of the apostles. Now, I used to have them all memorized. They all were martyred except for one. And that poor guy, John, was dipped in boiling oil. Peter was crucified upside down. Okay, Bartholomew, poor guy, he was skinned alive and then beheaded. Philip was stabbed with spears, I believe. I mean, it's a nasty business being a Christian. Now, we have the benefit of this 2,000-year tradition where so many of our forefathers and mothers suffered and died. And so we don't have to as much. But talk to some people from other parts of the world. There's extreme Christian persecution going on in certain places of Africa, in certain places in the Middle East. Extreme persecution. I mean martyrdom again. They might not have a coliseum with lions in it, but they're being killed. And while I don't want to end this talk on a sour note, I will not be surprised if that returns back to this country at some point in the future. I think that that's a possibility. I'm not saying likelihood, but a possibility. And so to live the Beatitudes, truly, all of these previous 7 that we've just seen, to live those Beatitudes at work and at school, at home, is a certain type of persecution because you're going against the ways of the world. And it's a persecution of yourself in a sense because it's difficult. Every one of the Beatitudes is a suffering. So all of this report card here is about, do you know how to suffer? It hurts to be poor in spirit. It hurts to mourn with others. It hurts to be meek when you want to be strong. It hurts to be merciful when you want to be just. It hurts. All of these hurt. And that's a persecution. That's a persecution. So we have to endure that persecution. And if the apostles can get skinned alive, we can probably handle a little bit of difficulty in swallowing our pride and being a peacemaker with our spouse. It's really not that bad. So I don't know what it means for you to suffer persecution in your particular life as a teacher or a husband or a wife or a parent. But I can tell you that there is no Christian life without suffering some kind of persecution. It goes hand in hand. Whether it's just voluntarily picking up that cross, and suffering for your spouse who doesn't deserve it, or suffering for the student who doesn't deserve it. Like you're being Christ-like there by picking up that cross, and you are being persecuted for righteousness' sake. So That's the 8 Beatitudes. All forms of persecution. And you have to ask yourself, okay, if I'm going to live these Beatitudes in my personal life and my work life, and when I'm talking to executives, I ask them, then what's your vision for your company? How do you take these Beatitudes and apply it to your work, to your company? If you own it, does it affect your mission statement? Does it affect your executives who you employ? Does it affect your handbook? Are you giving more vacation time to be merciful? Like, are there practical things you're doing in your business to implement the Beatitudes at work? Well, I ask you to go back and before classes ramp up, ask yourself, take some deep work time. We talked about deep work this morning. How can you implement the Beatitudes in your class? And being at a Catholic school here, you're allowed to talk about the Beatitudes with your students. That's a tremendous freedom. So can you learn the Beatitudes well enough between now and when school starts to talk to your students about the Beatitudes on the fly? I'm not saying interrupt math class and teach Beatitudes, but I'm saying when you're dealing with these students, can you integrate the Beatitudes into your interaction with them? Hey, time to be a peacemaker. Hey, blessed are those who mourn, okay? Little Jimmy's sick, express your concern, okay? Blessed are those who are merciful, right? Mercy, Jesus says to be merciful. Like, there's little ways to do this. So I encourage you to just reflect on how to do that in your particular job, because you give them report cards, but Christ will give you a report card. You have such an amazing job with these students, with these children, but also Christ says He'll judge a tree by its fruit. So these students are partly your fruit. You know, how are you impacting them? And I'm sure this seems like a wonderful faith-based community, so I'm just encouraging you. I'm not trying to be preachy to you. But these are wonderful lessons. And as leaders, which you are, I just think that we should reflect on Jesus gave us very specific guidelines to follow that we'll be judged upon. He gave us a great set of tools to take into the classroom and to shape these little souls for His sake. So with that, I thank you for listening to me today on two different subjects this morning and this afternoon. I'm so impressed with the community here. I was really honored and humbled to speak to you. And with that, I will take questions if you have any. So, but God bless you and thank you for having me.